Okay, basically, welcome. A little bit about what we're going to be talking about today and who we are. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to hear us speak before, we are Digital Securus. We are the only computer security consulting company here in Alaska and here in lovely Anchorage. And basically, we've been around for, almost 8 years now. I think October is our 8th anniversary here. And basically, we started specifically because there was a real need here in the state to be able to help organizations to be able to maintain and keep their networks and their systems secure. And we started just basically doing lectures and doing presentations like this. Back years ago, it was just very simple sort of making sure you had antivirus and making sure you had firewalls and things like that. Well, it's changed dramatically, as all of us know. Things have gotten much crazier with the amount of things and, of course, with regulation and things like that. So for us to be able to help people maintain security, make things better, ultimately is really our goal. We do not come into a company. We don't sell hardware. We don't fix networks. We don't fix your email. We literally are the specialist, like a doctor specialist, an eye, nose, throat type specialist that can get called in. Although we have a lot of general capabilities, we can come in and we do everything from basic assessments, security risk assessments, to risk analysis for people. We also have a full forensic unit here where we can do information security forensics on computers, cell phones, tablets, networks. But generally, that's when we come in that case, under that veil, when there's a problem with your network, when there's a potential breach, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, we'd rather be doing things like this, where we can all get together and talk about where the potential pitfalls are. We've done enough of these now in different areas, including medical, where we're starting to see trends. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is some of the areas where we see most practices that need assistance, and give you some thoughts and some suggestions as to how to get from here to there. So basically, this is the first of a series of webinars that we're going to be presenting with the help of the fine folks at AHEN. And we thought that for this beginning one, we're going to try and make it not too 101, but again, we want to make sure everybody kind of has an idea as to where we are and where we're going. The next one that we're going to be presenting is more of a 201, where we're going to be going more kind of diving deeper into the different processes of assessments or risk analysis of your specific practice. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and quit talking about myself and kind of get into what we're here to really talk about. One of the first things we were asked to speak on is this whole idea of the security requirements, specifically of meaningful use. And you can't say meaningful use without using the H word, which of course is HIPAA, and I'm going to try not to say that word too much, because whenever I do, it seems like people get a little sleepy and I lose them. So that's not my intention here during lunch. So basically the idea here was that our friends in the government decided that we were essentially going to work on helping us protect the information, specifically the information surrounding your EMR systems. So really, oftentimes when people are talking about meaningful use, it's really just a sliver of the whole security posture. It's the EMR. It's not the whole thing. And just because somebody may need some meaningful use, there's more to it, which is really why we want to kind of talk about everything here today. However, in that area of what they call meaningful use, there's a couple things that you have to do in order to meet this part of the security requirement. The first being performing a risk analysis on your inventory. We're going to actually explain what a risk analysis is for you today. You have to take what they call appropriate safeguards, which we'll also talk a little bit about, of protecting personal health information. And of course, you need to be able to provide your patients, they say specifically with an electronic copy. And the secondary part of that is you need to be able to produce documentation that you did that, because you're going to be held to it. So those are really the three things that they look for. Okay, so that kind of goes to one of the things we wanted to make sure that we were all using the same terms and defining things in the same way. We've even seen in some cases that documentation and even experts have used terms interchangeably. So we want to make sure that as we're talking, we all are on the same page when it comes to the words risk analysis, okay? And we actually define risk analysis and risk assessment as two different things. They're not the same thing. So for the sake of what we do and how we work with businesses, we look at a risk assessment as basically the overall evaluation of where you are at. It's kind of, some people have described it as a 50,000-foot flyover, which is good because it's a great place to start. And it gives you, for some businesses that have never, this is their first voyage into this area of being secure, it's a great place to start. But it's really just a roadmap. It's not a blueprint, if you will, which is why we put that. And for those who have never had one, it's really going in to see your doctor for the first time. He's going to run lots of general tests to be able to figure out if there's any potential problems. A risk analysis is much more in-depth. It is definitely more of a specialty, if you will, and says we're going to actually drill down, as my business partner says, into the different areas. Look at all of your risks. Look at the vulnerabilities, and we're going to say, here's where the problems are. And it's one of those situations where when you do a risk analysis, can be a very involved process, which is why we think a risk assessment is a good place to start, because it gives you an idea as to where in your company we should maybe go ahead and start an analysis. And it's definitely much more of the blueprint than a overall roadmap. And it will usually come up with some specialized, if you use medical treatment, if you will, for specific areas. So when I say risk assessment, I'm talking about a large umbrella that kind of looks over everything. Risk analysis, we're going to be looking at very specific things, oftentimes multiple things, wireless security, your server security, all of these things that are, and each and every one of them is going to be drilled down, and you're going to get specific, you're going to look at the risks, and we're going to make recommendations and fixes to specific things. So that kind of gets us on that plate. So what comes in a risk assessment if we do this overall assessment? Basically, we're going to look at how you're doing right now as of today. We're going to give you some areas of risk to look at. We're also kind enough to look at the things you're doing right as opposed to just the things you're doing wrong. We actually just recently finished an assessment for a practice, and what was really special about them was that they had so many areas where they were doing everything right. And I think that's important because most all of the companies that we've dealt with, they are doing things right. And we need to document that. And we do that in an assessment so that you can also say, hey, yeah, nobody wants to hear what's bad, but it's also important that you document the things that you're doing. And we make recommendations, especially in the area of these are areas where we need to maybe drill down. These are areas you need to work on. And we give you priority lists in the assessment to be able to say, you should start with this. This is probably the most critical area to start with. And it gives you a roadmap because, as most of our clients have said, it's the elephant in the room, and we're not even quite sure, what part to start on and how big of a bite to take. And that's what the assessment does for you. Now, when we come in and we're asked to do a risk analysis, or if anybody, because although we are the only information security company, consulting company in town, there are some firms that say that they do this, and I can definitely say that there are some national firms that you can contact who will do this sort of work for you from out of state. So what we wanted to do was give you some things that you should look for if you ask to have us or anybody else do a risk analysis for your firm. We believe that being able to do a risk analysis is going to contain at least these items. That is, you pay somebody, you set a statement of work, and they're going to do a risk analysis. It needs to, of course, include the scope of it. How big is this going to be? Is this going to be every computer? Is it going to be every computer, hopefully that we suspect maybe has EPHI on it? Is it going to include the servers? Is it going to include your fax machines? Is it going to include your phones? There needs to be some talk and discussion about how broad this analysis is. And of course, the bigger the organization, a hospital is going to be a whole lot different in a risk analysis and their assets versus a one doctor clinic. Then all of the information about those assets has to be gathered, because if you don't know where they're at, what they are, you can't analyze them. Once those are listed, whether it's in a spreadsheet or a list, then the idea is to identify what are the potential threats to those particular items, that particular data, those particular pieces of equipment, and what are the vulnerabilities. We look at what you have in place, and we kind of assess, is it high, medium, or low? Is it good? It does kind of, could there be some improvement? An analysis also looks at what's the likelihood that you're going to have a threat. For example, tornadoes are not a huge potential threat here in Alaska, but they are in the Midwest. Earthquakes, on the other hand, huge potential threat. And I say that because oftentimes we get so target locked on viruses or hackers, we have to remember that your information is just as unavailable if it's a hacker versus all of the lines get cut because we had an earthquake somewhere. So that's the sort of analysis that goes into this. Once you look at that, somebody needs to determine in this report that you're asking for the level of risk. How high is this risk? Again, tornadoes, not a very high level. Earthquakes, very, very high. And then look at the measures that are they commensurate with that, and document it. And like I've even heard some doctors say, and we used to say it in law enforcement when I was a detective, if it didn't get written down, it didn't happen. So it needs to be documented. Then once you have that, it gets developed and implemented into a risk management plan. The measures have to be implemented, and then it has to be evaluated. Now, I know this sounds like a lot, and it is. A risk analysis can be an awful lot, which is why a lot of companies haven't really moved to do it yet. So when you're conducting, let's go back to risk assessment, for a lot of them, there are some pros and cons. Some of our clients say, let's start with that. Well, the good thing is that we can start one and do one relatively quick. We can get them done faster than a risk analysis. We can give you that measurement of what you have, and we can cover all of these areas. And it tends to be a little cheaper than a full-blown analysis on certain areas. The downside is that it does not specifically meet the meaningful use requirement, and it's not going to get you, quote-unquote, in line with the HIPAA requirements, but it's going to give you an idea of that roadmap, where you need to go to meet those. It may also not hit all of the areas of risk. That's where the analysis can help. And the various assets that you're dealing with may not all be included. It's really, again, instead of what specific computers do you have or and where are they, it's how many computers do you have. And we look at the number, we base some assessment on that. But again, a lot of our clients like to do the assessment because it just gives them a start. Okay. It should include, so if you hire us or somebody else to do an assessment, it needs to include an examination of your policies, procedures, and standards. That's almost a third of it. And again, the reason is, and I'll touch on this later, it's because oftentimes companies don't have the policies and procedures in place. And we can talk tech and servers and IT all day long, but if you don't have policies in place, it's not going to matter. A good assessment from a company is going to include some technical testing. Some potential scanning of the network, which we'll talk about. There should be questions about antivirus. And we believe that there also needs to be this marryment of the technical part with the physical part. So we're kind of surprised when our clients will ask us, why are you asking us about locks and doors and card keys and filing cabinets and things like that? Because the information, whether it's electronic or physical, still has to be secure. Some companies will interview you. We prefer to use a questionnaire, but either way, it needs to be relatively comprehensive. I'm concerned some companies will spend 20 minutes talking to you, and then they'll give you an assessment based on that. We don't particularly go with that area. Our questionnaire is about 250 questions, and it's growing exponentially as we start to drill and ask other questions. Some folks say that it's a little laborious, but when they actually have done it, the feedback has been that a questionnaire like that, if they spread it out and have certain people do it, it makes it a lot easier. But it needs to include things like your policies and procedures, questions specifically about your EMR. It's going to ask questions about your physical security, financial risks, which is not something that a lot of other organizations ask about, but because our background involves criminal investigations as well as fraud and theft, which also can include the idea of theft of information, including PHI, we have a section just on financial risks where we talk about mitigating potential loss of monies, financial fraud, that sort of thing. And then the largest number of questions, which is around 100 for us, is that techie stuff. It's asking about servers and printers and things like that. And so we generally will work with your IT people to get that information. One of the other questions that comes up oftentimes is people will say, and they talk about this idea of a network scan being, that's our assessment. We had a scan of our network, so we did an assessment. And we're going to just kind of go off on that tangent for a moment because I think it's important in a 101 for people to understand what is a network scan. Basically, a check of your computer network to see if there's any what I call doors and windows open on your computers, on your network, or whatever part of your network faces the internet. And basically, the way I describe it when I'm teaching classes is think of a computer as a house, and that house has an address. 123 Oak Hill Drive is your home address. And you have 24 doors and windows in your house, all of which are points of entry and egress in and out of your house. Your computer is the same way. The computer in your network is given an IP address. Instead of being 123 Oak Hill Drive, it's 192.168.1.12, and it has a series of ports that can be opened and closed depending on your software. So what we do in a security scan of your computer and your network is we check the doors and windows. It is like physically walking around your house and seeing if the doors and windows rattle or if a window is open. And just so you don't worry, yes, it is normal to have some windows open on your computers and your network, but there are some that are not. So that's basically what we do. Depending on the size of your network, a good report is going to be relatively small or relatively large. In some cases, we've done some recently where there were absolutely no open doors and windows, and the report was very, very short. On the other hand, we've had some very long reports. There's two types of scans that can occur on your network when you're asked to do one or required to do one. And the two types are an external scan and an internal scan. An external scan basically is an electronic view of your network. What do I see from the internet? If I'm outside your neighborhood and I'm driving down your road, what can I see of your company, how it faces the internet, how it interacts with the internet? And basically we simulate what a perpetrator, what a bad guy would do to try and get into your house. An internal one examines the inside. The idea being that you have many more computers in your network that are inside that aren't all necessarily physically touching the internet. So we do the same thing, though. We think of all of those as a house with windows, and we check each and every one of them. So, for example, an external scan, we look at your face, your house, as it faces the internet, and we check the windows and the doors. So, for example, for those of you who are a little more technically savvy, they're called ports, and there can be thousands and thousands of ports, but there are some that are common. So, for example, every time you get an email, your email comes through the mail transfer protocol on port 25, so window 25. Whenever you surf the web, you may not know it, but your web surfing goes through window number 80, port 80. So we know those to be open. If you're doing online secured web surfing on your Amazon and you're buying stuff, you're going through port 443 or window 443. So that's the windows we want to check and see, and we check hundreds and hundreds of those ports to see if there's any open doors and windows. Internal scan is basically we go inside. We actually have to put something inside your network because we're not outside, put something in, and look at all your houses, all of your computers, if you will. Each computer itself has its own windows, and they all talk to each other. So the question is, what are they talking? Are there remote ports for remote desktop, logging into other people's computers? Printers are sharing information. You might be file sharing either individually on your computer or you have servers. So we check all those ports. So you can imagine that if we do an internal scan, the report may be quite large because every house may have thousands of ports and may have hundreds of ports that are open. So a good a report that you might see if you pay for one is going to have that detail. So the detail that you need to make sure you have when you buy a network security scan, it's going to have a list of all the computers that were discovered. It's going to have a list of all open ports, those doors and windows. It also should have, and this is important, what are the issues that were found, as well as a rating of those issues. Because some issues are minor, others can be huge. And the question is, you don't know unless there's a priority list of what ones need to be dealt with. We have done some scans that were so severe that we didn't stop to write the report. We called the company, we called the IT person and said, this is important, you need to fix this now. It can't wait for us to finish writing the report. Other things we see are noted and then dealt with, appropriately given the time. We also like to see a report that has a summary that speaks in English, not tech, something that everybody can understand. And we've seen them. We try very hard in our own reports to make sure that the executive summary has that information, as well as the backup data. Be aware that there are companies that sell what we have termed a pump and dump scan. And you can go online and ask for an external scan. You can even go online and ask for ways to do internal scans because you want to be more secure or meet certain guidelines. But be aware of what we call the pump and dump. This is a good example of a pump and dump. This is a printout of an Nmap scan of essentially one computer, one house, and you can see all the discovered open ports on the left side, all of these ports that are open, and basically there are companies that will do this, print it out, and charge you hundreds of dollars for it. And yeah, we do this. It's only part of what we do for our scans, but it really is not very helpful unless you have a really, really on-the-ball IT person who loves to read these, go through them manually, and interpret them. So be aware that this is something that, although it might meet some people's criteria as being a scan, it's not very helpful. So what we do is we actually take our scans and we actually develop it into a report, and we go into the ones that we see, and we give you some knowledge base. In this case, this is an example of one port, 1122.3.3. There was a open port. It was a medium concern to us. Had to do with their Apache web server. We go into what it is, what it means, the vulnerability, and how to fix it as well. So, and this is only one port and one computer. So you can imagine the reports can be very long, but this is the sort of thing that you need to be able to fix problems. It's kind of like, like my dad used to say, just do it because I said so. Well, this helps give it context so that you can understand the severity and the concern and get it fixed. All right, the H word, the HIPAA word. One of the things we want to do kind of impart to everybody is in some of these assessments that we've been doing for folks, when we're talking to them, we're doing these 250-word questionnaires, or we're going into their office, what are some of the things that we're seeing? And for us, the number one thing is that what we don't see is some sort of overall security plan. And that's actually a term that we use. It's not a term we've seen anywhere else, but we use it because it encompasses, if you have an overall security management plan and you implement it correctly, you are going to meet all of these different requirements for all these different organizations. And it's basically made up of two parts, and that is the electronic part, which HIPAA calls the security management process, which we don't like. Frankly, it's not very descriptive. We call it electronic risk security management plan versus the facility security management plans, electronic security and physical security. Again, you got to have them both. HIPAA, of course, calls the facility security one something different. But what we oftentimes see is that they may have part of one, they may have none of one, they may have a little bit in both, but generally speaking, what we see is the basis is we're not seeing any policies and procedures for either one of them, and that there hasn't been any analysis in those areas performed so that then they can document that they fixed them. So we like to talk to our clients about making sure they develop these plans, the electronic plan and the security management plan, and that is their guide that takes them through everything. Some of the things that you really need in this management plan include an external vulnerability assessment. not a pump and dump like we talked about, something that is meaningful that you can take, and it's not just a checkoff, but it is a way to be able to look at it and go, not only did we find these issues, but here's how we're going to fix them. That's what your IT people want to know. What are the levels of risk for all of your assets? Are we concerned about not being able to fax versus being able to get to our data out in the cloud? What are the internal security control reviews? Have we created them, developed them, and accepted them? And you're going to see this repeated several times even in this slide. The idea of creating your policies, your plan, isn't enough. You can't just take a boilerplate, put in your name, print it, and then put it up on a wall. It is an ongoing thing. It's almost kind of like it's a lifestyle. When you've got a patient who isn't healthy and you're saying, you need to eat better, you need to exercise, and it's not going to happen in 30 days. This is a lifestyle, a security lifestyle, if you will. So what we look is to help you develop these plans, the information plan, develop it. That's the first step. Then accepting it. And by accepting it includes having your legal people accept it, having your upper management accept it, and then finally having all of the people who work in your organization accept it. And then once you do that, that's not good enough. You've got to, review these things, because I hate to tell you, but technology changes every 6 months. What we're talking about and what you've got in place now is going to change in a year. It's not stagnant. Things move. So just like your information plan, you're going to do a facility plan. Companies that grow, that take on more doctors, that move into bigger offices, you need to change that plan. The other thing where we see your security plan has to have is auditing and logging. And I don't want to throw the H word out there, but it is a requirement. And we're finding that nearly all of our practices and businesses, I don't want to say fail, because that's kind of has a negative connotation, but let's just say that they're not meeting the full criteria of logging, i.e. they don't have any logging, they don't have any auditing, they're not keeping not just their policies in place, but they have no way to actually check and see what's going on. And that's another one that we see. So a good plan is going to have that. And then, like every good plan, it needs to be reviewed occasionally. Now, I'm always asked, how much is this going to cost, Glenn? And the answer is, it depends. Depends on the size of the practice, the number of employees, the number of computers, the locations, where you're at, EPHI health-wise. And so I can't sit there if I've got a single doctor practice, if they have really good policies and procedures and they've implemented them and they've been accepted and they only have 5 computers, well, they're sitting pretty good. It's not going to cost much to come up with a plan and get everything in place. A doctor of the same size that doesn't have any policies in place, that doesn't have the same thing, it's going to be more. So, again, it's going to depend. Some of the things that we like to point out, of course, and again, I don't like to be negative, but it's the whole idea of the mandatory compliance that's been coming, which includes the privacy practices, the right to restrict disclosures. So, for example, one of the things that came up recently in a talk was the idea that if a patient pays for it out of pocket, they can say, I don't want you to disclose my PHI, which that alone opened up a whole other series of discussions, which is, well, how do you track that? And how do you make sure that it's segregated from your other reporting? And I don't have an answer for you, but it is something that is worthy of discussion. As well as the statement of somebody's right to be notified during a breach. And we'll talk briefly with that near the end of this. Okay, I lectured on this before at the NGMA. I'm just going to touch on it here. The final omnibus rules are here. They came in January. This is why we're all kind of having these discussions. There's an effective date, but they're looking for compliance by September 23rd. That's a whole other class. But it's really not a law, right? Well, actually it is. We're going to have to really take into effect it. And in this 101, one of the other things that we're concerned about is that it's going to be tough enough for you and I to help your practice and your business reach a level of security that is that meets all of the different compliances. But guess what? On top of worrying about us, you have to worry about everybody else who does business with you, which is what they call the business associate. So they're going to fall under the umbrella of having to meet certain requirements, and that includes other organizations that you're dealing with, electronic prescribing systems, transmitting of data, other companies that provide healthcare records to people on your behalf, subcontractors. This is one of the biggest ones we see, and all of the IT companies are shocked when we tell them this. But the way we are interpreting it, your IT, if you outsource your IT, they're going to have to meet requirements as well, which actually makes sense, especially as more and more companies are having their IT managing their systems. They have access. You've got all these other people who have access to your data, which is protected information. And so we're actually starting to launch a project with these different IT companies here in Alaska to help them meet the criteria, because you guys can do everything right, and if your subcontractors screw up, guess what? Everybody can get dinged. So basically what we're saying is business associates is everybody who has access to you and your data, okay? So HIPAA is going to apply to them. They can be liable, but what we're saying is one of the things you should put on your to-do list is make sure that all your agreements clearly state that you're going to hold them to that, and that they are going to provide the information to individuals if need be. If you have another company that does the record keeping, especially if it's in the cloud, they have to make efforts to limit how much of that information. They may even have to be mandated to have encryption and things like that. So as you're renewing these agreements, make sure that you communicate to them that they're going to have to meet these levels. And if it's in the contract, that's good. If it's not, if something happens, that's where the attorneys are going to get involved, and we don't want that. So what this kind of means is that even with the best of your BAs, even if they are up to snuff, there may still be problems. So check with your attorneys, but we always say, be prepared. You may still be liable even if your IT company or one of your BAs does something wrong. It's not fair, maybe, in some cases, but everybody's being held to a certain level, and we're not, we're susceptible to it too. And we've looked at digital securists because we're oftentimes coming into your environment and we have potential access to your network. We too have set up our standards, policies, and procedures to meet the requirements so that we too are holding ourselves to the same standard. So that's another question. If you hire an outside firm, you might want to ask them if they have met these requirements before they go mucking around your network. There were changes in the new rules to the individual rights, which include that there are some specific disclosures allowed. So, for example, family members prior to a death can get disclosures. There were some issues there. Proof of immunizations can be sent to the school where the law requires that they have proof, so that was kind of fit in there. Changes to an individual's rights to restrict disclosure if they don't want things disclosed. Now, these all sound really great on paper, but in your practice, do you have procedures, policies in place to help make sure these things happen, and the documentation? Because that's ultimately what's going to come up. People are going to say, okay, if I've been requested to do something, what did I do, how did I do it, who did it, and when was it completed? These are the things that we worry about that come with this. And some of this actually opens up all other discussions, which in a group environment is kind of interesting for people to ask about. Breach notification rules. This is one of our favorites because this means this is the worst case scenario for you and your business. That when something bad happens, what do we do and who do we have to tell? Now, the rules are such now that you may not have to tell everybody. If you do, and look at this for a word, a risk assessment. And again, that's kind of an investigation, if you will, to determine if there was a low probability. So in a sense, one of the first things you need to be aware of, for those of you who haven't gone through it yet, if somebody reports a potential breach, you're going to have to essentially open up an investigation, if you will. There's two lanes of thought. If it's something very essentially obvious, you may be able to handle it internally. We oftentimes recommend your HR people handle it because it oftentimes involves your personnel or somebody in your IT, or having them work together for the purpose of checks and balances. But when it tends to be more serious, that seems to be when we're called in, because we come in as a neutral, objective fact finder. We can come in and do an assessment, figure out what happened when, and give you some level of probability, high, medium, or low. And based on that, you discuss with your attorneys and make the determination, what do you have to do in the way of actually notifying people. Some of the factors we look at when we're trying to help you decide if you have to report this is the nature and the extent. Was it actually viewed, which is kind of interesting, and or acquired? So we all think of somebody as, a breach as being somebody taking something, but simply viewing it can also be a breach. Somebody who's unauthorized who had it versus somebody who is authorized. What is the extent of the risk? So we have to also look at that, and these are all factors we look at when we give you a report to determine whether you're going to do it. And if you do have to report and something happens, one of the things that they look at, of course, is, well, and this is almost kind of it's one of the things in police work, who knew what when? And what was the intent? And were you malicious? These are all legal terms. So what they've done is they've come up with these 4 buckets, if you will, of seriousness of how bad you may have screwed up or your BA may have screwed up. And what they basically look at is, hey, you weren't even aware and you didn't know, versus you knew but you had reason to know. Willful neglect, not a good thing. You don't want to be in that bucket. And if you had willful neglect and you knew it and you didn't do anything to fix it, that's the most expensive bucket to be in. Ignorance is not necessarily bliss. So what are some of the things that we do? Well, I'm going to hit this again. Policies and procedures are the first place that almost all of our practices and businesses are lacking. And you start there. Frankly, if that's all where you start, I think that is huge. In fact, this other practice we just sat down with and met with, literally once he had done that, 90% of his work was done, and he had everything in place. He just needed a few more key things done, and we're working with him to do that. Okay, so in the first part, there are no real laws governing best practices, but again, this is why we say if you do an overall security plan and you have all of these things in place, you're going to meet all kinds of things, best practices, you're going to meet HIPAA, you're going to meet meaningful use, you're going to hit all of these things at once. So having a plan is better than having no plan. Working with your IT is important. I always like to show this to people. This is my little half joke to give to your IT person, because they always say, when you ask them the question, is our network secure? And they always say yes. So I always suggest, well, print this out and hand it to them and have them sign it so that when you have a problem, you'll be legally not made responsible. I have yet to see an IT person who will sign this to say that it is secure from all threats, and I take full legal responsibility for any issues that arise. And it's meant to be funny, but it's pretty serious, because you have to hold everybody responsible, and your IT people are so busy keeping your network running that security oftentimes falls by the wayside. And so this is a discussion you need to have with them. So again, where do you start? Looking at an assessment in some cases is the best way to get started. Determining your assets. This is part of that analysis as we're digging down. Where is all of our PHI? And in areas where you don't have PHI, that can help take that off the table and limit how much time and money you have to spend getting an analysis done. And part of that risk analysis is categorizing your assets, determining what the threats are. Is it a human threat, a natural threat, i.e. tornado versus earthquake, or a technical threat? And then we talk about having a roadmap. So if you hire somebody to help you do this, there should be some sort of priority list that's included. Now, going back to this idea of an overall security plan, it needs to include log monitoring, who has access to the internet. I hate to say it again, but policies and procedures are only so good if you don't do the training. You also have to track that training on top of everything else. Document, document, document. Be consistent, take a common sense approach. Know that you're not going to get it all done in a weekend. That's important. Okay? This problem didn't arise overnight. It's not going to go away overnight. Okay? Revisit your policies. Review your hardware. This is something that, again, is going to be ongoing. Even if we were to sit down and spend the next 12 months with you and your business, at the end of that, you're going to be much better off. But as soon as that happens, we're going to be back reviewing. You need to go back and see, okay, what's changed in the last 12 months? Well, when we're talking about that willful neglect, what is it? If something very bad happens, well, basically, you have to make sure that you have the documentation that you have met these requirements, that you are doing this. You can sit there. We've actually had some organizations that will say, we have policies and procedures in place, but it's verbal, okay? There's no such thing as a verbal policy and procedure. And I can tell you right now that the folks with the auditors or investigators who are going to come in, the first thing they're going to say is that they want to see your policies and procedures. Verbal is not going to cut it. Do you have demonstrated that you've trained your staff? Do you have a plan that you're working on it? Having a plan and starting the plan is really good. You don't want to be the business that hasn't even started. You want to be the business that has a plan that's moving forward. And again, teaching them that we have rules that say you don't write down your passwords. But in the real world, if you walk around, are there passwords on sticky notes? Have you implemented the guidance? Have you started to secure this information? Have you a plan for notifying your patients of a breach? Do you have a plan? It's funny, one of the things I talk about in some of my other lectures is we plan for a fire alarm, but we don't plan for loss of information, data, or simply not being able to get to our data. We had a discussion with a doctor yesterday about they use a cloud-based records management system, which is fine. But what happens when we have an earthquake or GCI goes down network? Do they have a plan to deal with that? And in the worst case scenario, what can happen when we get to the point where you have a breach? One of the things that we try and help our clients with is if you have to notify, there are ways to do it. There are ways to do it that, yes, it sucks to have chaos. It sucks to have something bad happen to you. And even when you do things right, things bad can happen. Like in this case, I'm not going to read this whole letter to you, but this is an actual breach notification letter sent to a patient, happens to be somebody I know. And in this particular case, they were mandated, and rightfully so, to send a notification to all of the potential patients whose data was potentially compromised. Now, there's a right way to do this and there's a wrong way, and this is the wrong way. What this letter basically said is that on April 7th, 2013, a vehicle owned by one of our employees was broken into and a laptop, along with paper files containing patient information, was stolen from the car. Okay, they're getting an A+ right now because they're laying it out. They're saying, here's what happened, and the stuff was stolen, and it had your data on it. Unfortunately, that's where it ends. They then basically tell the patient, to the best of our knowledge, your name and information were on it, and that there's no evidence that they were targeting you, and there's no evidence that it's been used, but guess what? You need to call all of the different reporting companies, Equifax. You need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do that. And although the information is technically correct, what this letter says is we screwed up and you need to deal with it. And then at the end, they add salt to the wound by saying that we take our obligation to safeguard personal information very seriously, and we're committed to exhausting all efforts to protect the confidentiality of your information. No, you didn't. You had somebody with a laptop and paper files in their car. So don't say you screwed up, then blame the victim, and then say that we're doing everything we can. This is a poorly written, and certainly you don't want to be the one whose letter is used in an example like this. We oftentimes will help our clients when there is a problem and a breach, help with the wording, help with the other options. Some of the options even include, and we work with some of these companies that will go ahead and do this check for you, and in some cases, go ahead and make sure it gets done for all the clients, checks in with them, makes a phone call. Sometimes it's the simple stuff. And this was something that could have been, yes, it was bad, but it could have been handled better than just a letter that was constructed like this. And frankly, I'm still trying to unscrew the family from the ceiling when they got this because they were not happy. And frankly, I don't blame them. So again, don't be this, but be prepared that bad things can happen. Basically, that's kind of the overall stuff that I wanted to talk to you about today. And at this point, if Anybody has any questions specifically? Let's use chat because I see that they didn't manage to fix the phone conference, but we'll try to figure out why that did. It worked actually quite well when we tested it a few days ago, so we'll get with Cisco and find out. So if there's any specific questions that you have, just type them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them over the next couple of minutes. Oh, good. And so hopefully everybody can hear. My business partner, Mike, who's also the head of our information security, also is seated here as my technical backup. And Mike, while we're here and we're waiting for anybody else who has any specific questions, do you have anything that you'd like to add with what we talked about today in the 101 class?
No, you kind of hit on a lot of the high points of meaningful use and the HIPAA security rule compliance, even some of the privacy rule requirements and the omnibus stuff, and hopefully we'll be able to drill down into some of the more specific areas here in some future webinars, like log monitoring, like vulnerability assessments and things like that. But I think this is a good overview of kind of where to get started and where to go.
Right. Mike, along with some of the things that I pointed out, is there anything else that kind of sticks in your mind with all these different assessments that we've been doing and these different organizations we've been helping? Is there anything else that sticks in your mind specifically where they seem to be lacking, or where it seems to be those top things that show up again and again in different businesses?
Yeah, you already hit on both of them, Glenn. The two overriding things are no overall security management plan in place, being documented, being implemented, being reviewed periodically, and then within that is a subpart almost across the board, the lack of logging, adequate logging to actually detect security events. So those are the two big things, and they sound like just two things, but it's really, when you say a security management plan, that really covers everything.
Right.
So a lot of clients that we've worked with have individual components of the security management plan in place. Some of them have good password security. They have screen timeouts set, things like that, but there's no cohesive plan to tie it all together, which is really what the HIPAA auditors are going to want to see.
Right, right. Now, when you say logging, and I didn't really get into it, but we have a couple more minutes, one of the things that I've seen is that logging is one of those things that you don't need it till you need it. And it's basically that videotape of what's going on in your network and who's doing what where. And it's really important from a perspective as an investigator. It is, when we come in and there's a potential breach or a problem, the first thing we look for is logs. Now, there seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, there's really two areas of logs that we seem to be called in on, either in a legal circumstance or in a business circumstance, to look at an assessment or an analysis. And that is logging of the computers on the network and the servers, but also we see that oftentimes what's forgotten is the logging on the EMR systems.
Yeah, absolutely. With logging, there's two different components. There's actual capturing of the logs, and what do you do with those? Where do you store them? How do you analyze them? And that's all great. But the other component is configuring the systems so that they actually generate the correct logs. And I've seen a couple of EMRs now where the audit policies were set such that the EMR itself was not even producing useful logs. And by useful, I mean anything that we could use to go in to look for security events, anything that the client could use to look for security events as required by the security rule. The logs have to be there first, and that's a real issue with some of the EMRs that we've looked at. Even the vendors are making recommendations that don't result in good logs being generated.
Right, and again, I hate to sound like your risk management person in your company, but it doesn't become a problem until it becomes a problem, and somebody makes accusations, somebody does something wrong, and all of a sudden you go to the logs, and when they're not there, you can't recreate them. Or what we're seeing is, they don't turn certain items on. So, we've met the criteria, we're logging, but you're not logging the right things. And so from an investigation standpoint, it's kind of like we had one where it was logging, meaning you failed to log in properly. So you're fat fingering or somebody's trying multiple passwords. It logged that, which is fine. That's important. But it wasn't logging correct accesses. So the way I described it is it's like having a video camera on your front door, and it only records when somebody kicks in the door. It doesn't record when somebody uses the right key. Well, chances are somebody's going to steal a key, or it's going to be an old employee who has an old key. Wouldn't you want to get that videotape too? So yeah, later on when there's a problem, that's when you want that stuff. So really, that login, I think Mike's going to be touching on that more in depth, but I wanted to make sure that we touched on that because I talked about it a little bit, but it's one of those things where when we're called in because there's a potential issue and you're asking us to render an opinion on whether or not this is a reportable breach, the first thing that's going to come out of our mouth is we'd like to look at the logs. Where are they? So if you got them, that's good. At this point, I think we're going to go ahead and end things. I appreciate everybody taking their lunch hour to come talk. And I saw we had some audio issues, but it looked like things came back. So I hope and anything that we need to work on to help technically, we will definitely get the call-in thing taken care of so that everybody can use the phone. Last time we tested it, I didn't use the phone because apparently my audio was so bad if I used the phone, which is why I'm now using a much better microphone system. So, but I again want to say thanks to everybody who joined us. Those of you who had to leave early or came in late, I appreciate your time because everybody's time is valuable, and I hope that that this last hour has been helpful to you. And I look forward to some of you joining us in the 201 webinar here soon. So thank you, and have a great day.
Glenn, this is Dave Peters with the REC.
Yeah, Dave.
I just wanted to put out that in order for folks to reach out to Digital Securus, it would be good to touch base with your Alaska eHealth Network REC, because the REC has grant funds that can help pay for risk assessments and analyses in support of meaningful use. And our number is 770-2626. That's 770-2626.
Yes, thank you for saying that. That's absolutely true. And also I want to thank all the folks there at AHEN for inviting us to do this. I've learned a lot, and I'm really hoping that if people feel like they've gotten something out of this, we can do many more and make them just better and better. And if you do have a topic that you think you would like to discuss or hear us talk about, and this is a good forum to do it, please talk to Dave, talk to your contacts there, and we would be more than happy to try and come up with something. So yeah, this is such an area where things are always, it's such a huge area that if somebody has something, if one of you has an issue or a question, chances are most of you do. So Dave, you want to add anything else to that?
No, I think you've got it covered. We're Digital Securus is a contractor of the Alaska eHealth Network, and we utilize their services to support our clients, your folks, and look forward to additional support for you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Have a great day.